Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here today with a wonderful group of people. We are reading Gardens of the Moon together. So we'll go ahead and go around the room, and if you could just introduce yourself and tell us how many times you've read the series, if any, or how many times you've tried to read it. So Layla, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Layla Goshi. I teach literature, and I've been wanting to read Malazan for quite a while. I did try two other times to read Gardens of the Moon. I think it wasn't so much the book as my ability to focus. I think that was it. But I think it helped me third time I started because I recognized certain characters that I'd encountered already. So, but overall, it was a great experience, a great reading experience.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Ursi. My channel is called Cersei's Books, where I just talk about all different kinds of books. I love reading everything. And this is my first time reading this one. And it is an experience for sure. um, so I actually have a background in humanities and history and all that kind of stuff and education. So I was really surprised with the struggle with this one, but I mean it's not so bad. It's just a
Mhm.
lot. So, but yeah, this was my first time reading this one, so it's very interesting. I'm just excited to talk to you guys all about it. So,
My name is Joseph Carroll. I'm an author, just a general member of the BookTube community. I like to support, great people, helping people read and learn, stuff in general. This is my second time reading Gardens of the Moon. I'm actually like four books in, but I came back to kind of refresh because there's so much that goes on in this first book. So I wanted to go back through it and make sure I, had everything as straight as you possibly can.
Okay, I'm Philip, and I read this series for the first time. I don't actually know exactly when, probably around 6 years ago, I'm guessing. It was before I knew about BookTube anyway. And so I read the series on my own and knew that I wanted to reread it. So one of the big things I wanted to do when I started a channel was to do a Malazan reread. And I've been very fortunate in that I've been doing this reread alongside my friend AP Canavan, who is he has a channel, Critical Dragon, and he also happens to be the advanced reader for Stephen Erickson and Ian Esselmont, and he's don't tell him I said this, but he's brilliant. So, it's been a lot of fun for me to read the series alongside him and learn from him. And we've had a great time discussing the series over the last. We're not quite done. Actually, I'm in book 9 right now, Dust of Dreams, and I'm almost done with it actually. So AP and I will be finishing our Malazan reread because it's a reread for him too, very soon, probably a month or so, give or take. So, but yeah, and thank you, Steve, for having us all here. It's really a privilege and a joy to be here with everybody.
Yeah. So I am Yulien. I also have a channel, Yulien Reads. This is the first time that I tried Malazan, and actually, a year ago, I made a video of books or series that I would never touch, and Malazan was on that list because I just heard how difficult it was, and that you had to reread it to understand stuff. That it took until book 6 until you had an idea what was going on, and that just didn't really sound like a lot of fun to me. So I was very hesitant to pick it up. But then Steve announced the read along, and I thought, well, if I'm going to read it someday, it's best to read it with other people so we can discuss it and I can understand it a little bit better. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that I understood something and that it wasn't as difficult as some people say it is. But at the other hand, I'm very glad that a lot of people warned me because that made me go in with the right expectations, I think. And when I didn't understood something, I didn't immediately feel like it was my fault. Everybody was going through that, so it was fine. But yeah, I'm very glad that we are doing this read along and that I understood something. So
And we had talked a little bit before we went live, but in reading this, I wondered if the portions that I struggled with, if I would have struggled had I not been told so many times this is a really difficult book to read. I wonder if I would have had a different approach and not struggled with it as much as I did, having not known anything about it. Feel free to. We have to break the ice a little bit.
I had that feeling too, as I did start reading it, the first two times, because there's so much that comes at us, in different books that we want to read. But, even about 4 chapters in, when I just started recognizing how I enjoyed the description of the characters. I didn't know where it was going yet, but I really began to be attached to the characters and the little subtle details that were starting to, be provided to us. And so I think once I was in, I did get hooked pretty soon. So I think, I think we need another narrative now on, Malazan is not as hard as everyone has made it seem. So. All right. May I ask, am I pronouncing that correctly? Malazan?
It's fine, however you say it, but I believe the way Erickson would say it is Malazan. So the Malazan, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's named after the island of Malaz, so it's just the adjective form Malazan. Yeah.
Okay.
Like Roman. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that this book series has been helped immensely by BookTube, and Philip has been one of the top guys. Don't want to get your ego going there, but I think it's made it so much more accessible because you had people to fall back on to help you kind of get through it, because if you're not used to this, this epic scope and so many POVs, and you might get lost in it, and it might deter you a little bit. But through Philip and other people kind of telling you that this is what to expect, and doing a lot of spoiler-free stuff, it helps so much when you want, because you hear so much about it, you want to go into it. And if you were just out in the dark by yourself and you just pick the book up, you might not be able to go through it, because it's not the easiest book to read. But that's why I love having everybody here, and we can all kind of help each other understand parts where we're like, what was this about?
Yeah, for sure. I just noticed that Bailey Books and Sport made a comment in the chat that I want to agree with about Iskar Jarek, who really is sort of, I think of him as like the grandfather of MalazTube, and he had this channel where he kind of I'm sure there were others on BookTube talking about the series before him, but he really just got the ball rolling and encouraged a lot of people like myself and many others to make videos on the series. So what you're talking about, Joe, is really thanks to Iskar in large part, I think. So yeah.
So I had a very interesting experience with this one in terms of the approachability of it. So I'm really glad for all of the forewarnings that I got, because I was kind of in the right headspace to read it. And so I did start it, and then I got about 200 pages in, and then I had to buy the audiobook to help me get through it. And then I started over with the audiobook and reading it at the same time. And it was just like this hyper focus that I needed to have to read it, because it just reminded me of like the Song of Ice and Fire, with all these different POVs coming at you. And like, that's one of my favorite series. Like, I love that series. And I'm one of those people that you can ask me and I'd be like, well, this ties in here and this ties in there, and this, with that series. And I can see it being the same way, only on like a really grander scale, with this one. And so I think it's going to be one of those things where this is one of those books that I'm going to have to reread to understand it more. Not that I didn't understand it, because I did, but for what I can grasp But it just to be able to like talk about it is going to be one of those things where it's really complex, and you're going to have to just pick apart like really small storylines to talk about, and not like this grander thing that you can do with like a lot of other books. So it's really complex, and I like that about it, but I just struggle with the approachability of it. Like I really do believe it's not for everyone just because of how complex it is.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I also struggled a little bit, especially in the beginning, because you have in each chapter you have different POVs, and he switches between them without really announcing it. And you do have that in some other books as well, but then usually those people are of the same party, so at the very least they are in the same scene at that moment. But here they were just scattered across the plane, and all of a sudden you were with somebody else. And in the beginning, I really needed to focus and sometimes go back a couple of sentences because I didn't really realize that we shifted. But if you continue reading, and because I knew that this was a little bit difficult for everybody, I just continued, and then you get used to that mindset, I suppose. Towards the end, I will definitely have to reread the end, because then everybody got together, and I couldn't really remember anymore, okay, who said what about this certain thing, for example, and I had to go back, like, who knows what. So I think that I will have to read it. But I'm excited to do so, but I, especially before we get into the second book, I think. If it's a trilogy, it's fine. If you just have like the overall picture and okay, we go to the second book. But for a 10-book series, I think that your like fundamental knowledge of the first book and of the beginning needs to be better than what I have at this point.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the I agree with everyone so far in terms of it can feel daunting in the sense that, like a lot of other big epic fantasy series, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of places, and a lot of names to get used to. So it does have that in common with a lot of other big series that we can talk about. You mentioned The Song of Ice and Fire. We could talk about Wheel of Time. We could talk about any of the big ones, or even some of the trilogies. There's just a lot of weird names and different places and things to get used to. So there is that. But I think another thing about Malazan is that Erickson and also his co-creator Esselmont, they don't follow the typical narrative in that you don't have a central character or even a group of central characters that we follow along with, that they're the heroes and we're going to identify with them and they're going to triumph and save the world. That's a more typical fantasy type of narrative. Here you have a large cast of characters and they're all part of this vast tapestry. And in some ways, it's not like they're doing something revolutionary, because it's done in literature all the time, but it's atypical of fantasy. So you go into fantasy with these expectations about there being a hero, or at least even in grimdark fantasy, there's usually a central character. We follow along with this character and we identify with this character. Here you have lots of characters and we identify with them in these moments. And they become incredibly vivid, but not one of them is going to be saving the universe. There's all these complex narratives coming together, weaving together into this tapestry. So I think that that's something that maybe throws people a lot of the time too, is that you read fantasy, you expect a hero, you expect a protagonist, and here it does not. Erickson's doing something different. So in that way, and in many other ways, he enjoys challenging the tropes. Yeah, and you don't know. You're exactly right, Stacey. That is such an apt comment. You don't know who you're supposed to root for because of all of this. You get characters that you feel are villainous at first, and then you learn more about them and you kind of understand them. And then the characters who might seem like, oh, these are the heroes, but then you think, oh, wait, they're working for this terrible empire that's killing people. Are they actually the heroes? So there's this sort of real life level of complexity here that we're dealing with, and it's literature. It reflects life in that sense and the complexity of people. So in that way, I think if you come into it with that expectation, I think it helps a lot. So
is that what most people struggle with? Do you think is that, or is there something in the writing style itself that some people just have to adjust to?
I noticed that, it opens with Ganos Parin, I think, and as a young man, and that is a trope of the young man, going off to war and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I focused on that. I kept thinking, okay, I'll see him again, and I did see him again, much later. But it is apparent now that he is not the hero of the story. He is just it's just like the window opened there, and our window on that world opened there, and it just happened to be Ganos. And so I think, in a way, that's helpful to Hook, but at the same time, I think that makes it confusing because for a while you keep waiting for him to come back, and then eventually, we see a wider world. Yeah. So
I
That's
think there was
beautiful.
that one line that he says and it comes up again. And I had to highlight it. He goes, who was it? Somebody said to him, the best life is the one the gods don't notice. And
Yeah.
I was just like, I feel like that's going to come up again. And it did. And it kept coming up again because he was just so upset about having to be put in these positions. He's like, why me? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But I really like that line because
That's
I
what
was like, yes. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I thought Philip was going
Okay.
to say
Yeah.
something.
Oh,
I'm not
Ruth,
sure what's going on with the internet here.
oh, you're coming in okay, if you can hear us.
Okay. Did I disappear, or did everyone else, or did we all? I don't know what happened there.
Oh, we were
But
here.
anyway,
I'm still here.
okay. It was just me then. Sorry. So I just wanted to react to what you were saying because Whiskey Jack says that to Parent
Yeah,
in the
it was
prologue. Yeah. So, but that's something that reverberates throughout the story, and that's another thing that Erickson does. You sort of look for these little things. There's a lot of foreshadowing, that things that just sort of fall into place. So, yeah, that's beautifully said. And don't believe a thing that Ruth and Bad says either, because who would trust somebody with a name like Ruth and Bad anyway, right?
Quick Ben is the real hero of everything.
Oh, Quick
Yeah.
Ben is fun.
And speaking of the beginning, I love the battle at Moonspawn. That was such a different type of combat or actions. It was a different type of action scene that I don't think I've read before in fantasy, not like this, but it was really on a grand scale and not, it felt epic with not a lot of, it didn't take up a lot of space on the page, but it felt epic in scale in the moment.
Mhm.
It was definitely different for sure. Like with all these different players in different parts of like the field, or even just seeing like the aftermath of it with hair what's his name? Oh,
Hairlock.
there's so
Hairlock.
many characters. Hairlock, right? And I knew Hairlock was going to be one of those mischievous characters, like just from his way of like cheating death in those moments. I don't know if we're doing spoilers or anything, but Hairlock and his like he's like cut in half and he's on the field and stuff. I really thought he was going to be one of those mischievous characters, but even like just the aftermath of like Tattersail like screaming and all, like you feel the pain that everyone is kind of going through afterwards, and I don't think that we see that a lot. Just everyone kind of feeling those moments of like looking at the destruction and like what to do with the bodies and all that. Like I thought that was pretty interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned Hairlock. He's one of my I guess favorites in a way. At the end, maybe not his end, I'm not sure, but he I found some humor in his situation. It's I don't know if I was supposed to find humor, but he's seeking immortality, but yet he's trapped in this box and he's trapped in this body, and just furious, and so powerful, um, yet so boxed in at the same time, literally, and And I don't know, I found some of it humorous. I don't know if that was intended to be, but yeah, yeah, he's a favorite. And Sorry is a favorite too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. One of the great things about the Battle of the Pale is that not all allies are friends or trust each other.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really like that. And that also made me think, is somebody just being paranoid here, or if this is actually going on? And I liked, Steve, you mentioned that it felt very epic. Normally, I'm not somebody who likes military fantasy, but here, even though it was epic, you still focused on some of the characters. And it was really a device to make you know those characters more and make them more distinct, which I really enjoyed. Because just from that first moment, you already meet quite a few of those characters, but for me, it wasn't difficult to distinguish them, which
Mhm.
normally I can't do that. So I really like that part. I do hope that it's not going to be more military fantasy focused in like military tactics because I'm not the best at that. But judging from the first book, I hope that I will be fine.
Philip's face said it all.
Well, I will say that there's plenty of more military fantasy in the series, but there's also, I know people who love military fantasy and that's their favorite aspect of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And then I know people who cannot stand military fantasy, but still love the series because it offers so much more than that. And like Layla was saying about Hairlock, it is funny and there's a lot of humor in the series. There's a lot of pathos in the series. Erickson has incredible range where he can reach high tragedy, but he also can do some really crazy comedy at the same time, and he mixes all this. That's why I mean, a lot of times you'll hear people compare it to like Shakespeare or something, because you get that in a Shakespeare play as well. You get all kinds of levels going on simultaneously. So there's plenty in there that's not military fantasy as well, but there's a lot of military fantasy to come. So I'll just say that.
Yeah. Well, and that's like watching all the reviews and discussions. I kind of was thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I'm the only one, but like, because everybody loves to talk about like the serious parts of the book and the emotional parts of the book, but like my favorite character is Crumpa, and Hairlock, and Hairlock was awesome. I mean, I think Erickson does awesome like comedy and and ways to lighten certain scenes up. I think he's excellent at that.
Mhm.
Krupa
Yeah.
was great. I started talking to him about like in his style for like a day just because I thought it was
Oh,
just
no.
too funny. Like Ursi likes Ursi thinks. It was
Ruth
great.
says, nice observation. Malazan is a great example of military fantasy that captures the epic scope, but without ever losing sight of the individuals on the ground.
Very
Mhm.
true.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you can listen to him on that point.
You know,
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say something else about Kruppa. He is such an interesting character because when we first become aware of him, I'm thinking, how is he surviving in this rough world? Because he seems so just not taking the world too seriously. But then, so much more I won't go into about it, I guess, for spoilers. But definitely, that's a front for him. Yeah.
Yeah. Are we doing spoilers? We are, right? Or are we waiting?
Yeah, Guardians of the Moon is all you can spoil everything. Yeah,
Oh,
we're
okay.
Spoil
spoilers,
away.
yeah.
Okay,
No
great.
worries.
Yeah, because I totally agree with Layla about Krupp and how
Mhm.
he puts up a front, and that's a very clever thing because he's actually much more power. He's the eel of Darujistan. He has incredible power, and
Right.
he is clever enough to hide that from people, and no one knows his actual role. He's kind of very slippery, behind the scenes, and he appears, very non-threatening and sweaty and ridiculous, and always stuffing himself with pastries and he's very subtle, like he's walking down the street and waving his hands around and stealing things and putting them up his sleeve, and he's just sort of this walking comedic absolutely mind-blowing, powerful character. So yeah, and a lot of fun. I absolutely love the character as well, and he kind of has a meta purpose as well. In his dream parts where he's a little bit outside the story, kind of looking in, and he can manipulate things, and he can do things in that little dream warren of his that are actually kind of scary, powerful too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Crumpet and the Truth have been lifelong friends. That's one of my favorite.
Yes, said with a little bit of irony there. Yeah.
Or what was it? He was going to complain about the hill, the inn being on top of the hill. He's like, I'm going to tell the innkeeper, you shouldn't put it on top of the hill. What's wrong with him? I was just like, that's great.
So what is everyone's favorite characters? I think a couple of you have said Krupp already, but what's everyone's favorite or the character they're most intrigued by?
In Gardens of the Moon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say Sorry Absalar. Yeah, I love the name. I mean, the name Sorry, it just conveyed so much about her situation, even when I didn't know as much about her, in the beginning. And then her choosing the name Absalar, which Crocus did not seem to like too much, but it seemed to be choosing a name of power. And so, we'll probably see her again at some point. I mean, that's such a rich character. This can't be the only book that we find her in. So crossing my fingers that that's the case.
Yeah.
I liked a lot of people. I liked Sorry a lot for mainly a lot of the same reasons you said, Layla. But I also really liked Lauren and the power that she kind of holds, like a reserved power. Like she knows she's going to have this authority over all these people, and they're going to do what she says because that's her position. She's right under the Empress. Even though, again, it's really hard to root for her because they're part of this empire, right? And that's trying to take over. I just think of like Star Wars, right? So, like, it's like you're rooting for Darth Vader. Like, what? It was really hard to root for her, but I still really liked her character, and I was really excited to get her perspective a lot of the time. Just because I don't know, like I think it was just like that reserved quality of her, of just like knowing that she has this authority over all these men a lot of the time, and they're kind of confused as to like why am I going to be listening to her, but I have to do it anyways because she's got all these bodyguards and all these people behind her. So yeah, I just really liked her character.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also really liked when you have the standoff almost between Lauren and Tattersail. And you can see that she has some personal feelings towards Tattersail, to say the least. But then she remembers, I need to be the voice of the Empress, and she completely shifts. So I thought that was interesting to see. But I do think that my favorite character was actually Tattersail, and I think we should definitely see more of her. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, I finally got my computer working.
Yay! Oh yeah, Tattersail was fun too.
Yeah, because now they are saying something of a seer on the far west or east, somewhere far away. And I want to see if maybe Tattersail is coming back to play something related to that, because she's very powerful as well. And now she's a child, but she's already 6 years old. So there's definitely not really a linear timeline here. So I would like to see if something happens there. And I also like that she is a bigger lady, but it's not really focused on. You just know that she is, and she's not like the comedic relief almost, which you often see. So I really liked her character in that regard as well.
Yeah, and one thing I think Erickson has done really well is with Animator Rake, is he's supposed to be this epic character from the beginning. Everyone talks about him, or is afraid of him, or super respects him. But in a lot of books, when you have a character that's set up like that, once you get into the character, it doesn't feel like what you expect or what you hope. But I think he actually has, through his dialogue, I think he has some of the best development through this first book, at least. Because some of the characters, they are who they are, kind of through the whole book. You just kind of know them, and they're kind of the same character at the end of the book. But I think you get more of him, and he kind of releases more of what's on the inside of him throughout the book, which made me, once he gets to do the epic stuff that he gets to do towards the end, you're kind of, he's almost the hero to at least to me, once he gets to kind of go do his thing, because we're all like, well, who's the hero? And I almost, would say it's him, the way Erickson makes you feel about him.
This comment made me laugh. Wait.
Krupp is a Scarlet.
I don't know if Stacy knows what we're doing. We're talking about our favorite characters from the book, Stacy. So if you want to go ahead and tell us yours.
I liked them all, but I think my favorite is Tool, and I really hope we see more. Yeah. But
Awesome.
I liked Tattersall. I was really upset when I thought she was dead.
Mhm.
And then she came back, and I'm kind of like, what's going on? Like, Yoli was saying, is like she aged to 6 years old overnight. It's like, what is she? Does she or does she not have her memories? We don't know. The reader doesn't know what's going on. She seems to remember Captain Perrin. Quick Ben. There's more than meets the eye there. I want to know more about Quick Ben. I loved all the characters, even the ones that I at first thought were, like you were saying, were supposed to be the bad guys. And that's like, Lauren was probably the closest thing to the villain of this story. And even then, you don't really know what to think about her. So I think that this is probably one of the best military fantasy books that has such incredible character development. A lot of times when you read something that's epic military, and this wasn't like a bunch of battles, but it was very much militaristic. But you get what's going on military wise through the eyes of the characters instead of, this overarching view from the sky of these two armies coming together. And I think that was one of the things that I had hoped would have been more in the John Gwynne books, which is the reason why, I didn't really go on past Malice. But this did it really well. And I think it's because you dropped into it. You don't know what's going on. You're getting what's happening in the world through the eyes of the characters. So they're like your conduit to what's happening. And so you kind of build, a connection to each character as you go through. So the hardest thing for me was every time it would switch POVs is this the good guys? Are these the ones that I want to win? And then it would switch. It's like, oh, but I like these people. And then you'd get the assassins. You're like, I know they're assassins, but I really like them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you all said such wonderful things. I feel like every time one of you gave an answer, I would think, oh yeah, that's my favorite character. So, but I absolutely agree with you guys. There's a wonderful, I think, thread here that from your descriptions of your characters that emerges. And I think maybe Lauren is the one that haunts me the most from Gardens of the Moon. And although I love Absalar's arc, which I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say she does appear again. But Lauren's the one that haunts me the most because I felt that there was the potential there for her to do the right thing. And she ends up doing what she feels like she's part of this vast empire. She is literally the adjunct of the Empress. She is the Empress's will. She is the arm of the Empress. And so she's really not supposed to have any will of her own. She's there to enforce, to do what is best for the empire, which isn't always very nice. It ends up crushing people. It's like we're all these little cogs in this vast wheel. And she feels very much like that. I think that speaks a lot to the modern condition, actually. And the role of larger things like empires, and they roll over people, and they can be incredibly indifferent to our individual fates. So Lauren feels very caught up in that, I think, and there are moments when her humanity almost comes out. That dinner scene where things get sort of flipped. Because Yolene mentions Tattersail, and we love Tattersail. She's one of the characters that we identify with, and she's wonderful. But in that dinner scene, what we learn is that she was responsible for the deaths of Lauren's family, and that this is the thing that's haunting Tattersail. And so the things get flipped. Suddenly, Lauren's not the villain. Tattersail is here in this particular scene, at least. Or maybe villain isn't the right word, but we learn things about both these characters in this scene, and we get the sense of empathy for Lauren here. She was a child when this happened to her, and she was taken by the Empress at some point, and we don't know what it entails, but she was made into the adjunct. I assume there's some kind of training involved that's not very kind. So for her to have little hints of her humanity there when she's near the end, when they're releasing the Jagged Tyrant and she's with Tool, and that's happening, she has second thoughts. And for her sake, I wish she had sort of stepped back, but she ends up, unfortunately, making the wrong decision, making the decision that is, in conformity with her role as the adjunct rather than the humane decision, and releases this horrible terror on a city full of civilians. But she's a tragic character. Her ending in this is just absolutely, I never felt like, yay, she's dead. It was more like, this is a real tragic waste of a human life,
Yeah.
And I like the way that Perrin dealt with that too. I mean, he could have left her, there, but he took her, and I thought that was really, because he was very angry, right? I mean, he was like, I'm going to get her. He was, he felt betrayed by her. Felt like but I don't know. It was different. It was more than what I expected. It kind of showed his humanity. That we all get angry and we're like, oh, I could kill him. But if that were ever to happen, that's how we would react. That person ended up dying. We would be like, oh, So I thought that was a very human scene for him, the way that he reacted to that. And it kind of was like, maybe this isn't what I wanted, but it's too late. But this is going to be one of those series that I'm going to have to see it through the end, because I already am so invested in the characters. And I have to say, I started Dead House Gates, and I was like, oh, who are these people? It's Whiskey Jack.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah, the series as a whole does kind of, A.P. Canavan, the guy I mentioned in the beginning that I'm reading it along with, has this wonderful metaphor. He compares it to World War II, where you had these different theaters of war. You had stuff going on in Europe. You had stuff going on in Africa. You had stuff going on in Asia.
Japan.
So that's what absolutely. So that's what the Malazan Book of the Fallen does. You have this one theater here on Genebakis, and then you go to 7 cities, and then you go back to Genebakis, and then you go, and in the 5th book, you're introduced to an entirely new continent. So yeah, there are various theaters which do gradually come together in one very powerful narrative by the end. But yeah, it's a lot. It is. There's a lot going on.
It's very ambitious.
Yeah.
Yep.
I heard a lot of reviews, people say that the writing style was so bad in the first book and it gets so much better by the second. But I didn't see any issue. I didn't have any issues at all with the writing. I didn't see that it was bad writing at all. Now I can see how some people might not like the style, because you're very much only getting the information that the narrator wants you to have, right? You only get the thoughts of the characters at the time that they happen. You don't get them sitting there, unless it's necessary, them pondering, their life choices. And, like, for example, Lauren, you don't know her backstory until she comes into contact with Tattersail, and that results in her reaction. And then the narrator explains her reaction. She's not just sitting there thinking about her family that died. I loved that. I like that concept. It's not something you read a lot in fantasy. Fantasies, it's either info dumping or a first person POV, right? You either get everything or you just get what one character has. And in this case, you don't even get all of the inner dialogue of the characters. You're really just given piecemeal. And so it makes you like read page, I have to know more. I gotta know more. And then it switches to I gotta know more about this character. I gotta know what's going on with these gods. Who are these gods and why are they involved in what's going on in this world? And how are they trapped? You know, there's so much history also in this world that you only know a little bit about. I think that's great, but I could see how some people that are used to, you know, the Brandon Sanderson type fantasy where you get everything you need to know about the world, this might be a little bit hard to get into because you want to know who are these people, what is this war, who are their enemies. You don't get that here, not in the same format anyway. But I'm curious. Having read, I don't know if anybody else here has read the rest of the series, but having read, do you see any validity to that statement? Like, does it get better? Or in what way does it get better if it does?
Oh, to the idea that the writing was okay. Yeah. So first of all, I agree with everything you just said. I think you said it beautifully. I think Erickson's writing is among the very best. Just if you're analyzing the prose, if that's what we're talking about, I think he's brilliant. And there are very few writers in literature, period, that's this kind of range. And if you're talking about the portrayal of characters, I don't know too many writers who can get me invested in a character that quickly either. And using exactly what you said, you hear this all the time, but the show don't tell. More approach to presenting characters where the reader is sort of not given every little detail that's going on. You have to sort of use your head and sort of figure out, oh, okay, this is, what's going on here. So it invites a certain level of reader participation. It's a less passive experience, I think. And Gardens of the Moon does that. And I think what happens is people sort of aren't used to that and they get thrown into it and they maybe even resent it a little bit. And so they think this is terrible writing because, so I think that reaction happens more with Gardens of the Moon, whereas people get further into the series and they get used to it. So there might be a perception that the writing improves because of that. I don't see a vast difference, honestly, between Gardens of the Moon and the rest of the series. I know that Erickson has said, he has expressed it here and there, kind of maybe I could have helped the readers along a little more in Gardens of the Moon, and that might have helped. So he has said that, but I don't think that it's in any way, shape, or form terrible writing. It's actually brilliant writing.
I didn't think so either.
In my
I thought so.
Actually, I agree too. Yeah. And something I noticed, I actually had to sit and think about it. Right off the bat, I started I could feel the mood of the world that the characters were in. And then going back to actually look at, even how the book opens, just the choices of words like rust and centuries old and, different terms that immediately I felt like I was walking into a darker world. I don't mean that in a negative way, but as I was reading through all of the book, I just felt this weight of darkness, I guess, over everything. Partly because what the characters were saying, but also how the scenes, the word choices used with the scenes. And I do think it's art. I'm just, just thrilled by it. So, so that's my comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing, I initially thought that Stacey had said people had commented about the writing. I thought they were meaning the prose initially. And no book's perfect, but as far as the pros go, I would put Erickson at the very top of the list. Like, I don't know if anybody, they're sure there's some people that's probably up there with him, but as far as his prose go, I think they're as good as it possibly gets. I mean, as you just read through it, you're just like, if I were to try to write something like that, it would take forever because I would just have to it would be a mind melting experience to try to get it to flow the way he does. So his pros, and as far as, I don't know, maybe if people feel like, because he comes from a D&D background, right? So that's where him and Esselmont, that was their big thing, so maybe some people feel like they just walked into a D&D a D&D campaign that they've been doing for a long time, and they're just like, hey, sit down, and you're just like having to kind of grasp where you're at in this situation, because he doesn't hold your hand as much as some other authors will. So and maybe that's because I feel, at least in the second book especially, I feel like he dials in more. You're not as all over the place, I guess, as you are in Gardens of the Moon. So maybe that's why some people think the writing gets better. But I mean, I think his writing's pretty consistent. The style and everything is consistent, but he just kind of dials in the future books, on to fewer and fewer characters. I don't know past book 3 and 4 if it gets even more dialed in, but
It's funny what Frank I don't know what he's saying here. At the very first, I guess it's the prologue of Dead House Gates. You read like a whole page and then you're like, oh, okay, this is, I can't even remember the woman's name, but I was like, who is this person I'm reading about? Oh, okay.
But you guys are absolutely right with like the writing style. Like, even though you don't know for like a minute, right, like whose perspective it is, but the writing style is really great. I think one of my favorite passages is gonna sound funny, but it's like the introduction of Crone, the Raven. I think that I even had to stop and like read it to my husband and just be like, look at how he wrote this, and just think of how beautiful, like the imagery of this giant bird, and I love birds, so maybe that's why, but this giant bird just coming down, and she's just like having this power over all the other ravens, right? I just thought it was just so beautiful the way that he just wrote that, and I was just stuck on it and I read it like a few times over because I just thought it was just brilliant. And then I had to stop and be like, okay, we got this live show coming up, I gotta read this book. But I just thought it was just so beautiful, and like you get stuck on these passages, and like just the way that he writes certain things, like it's just great. I just really loved it, especially that passage with Crone. I really love that.
What about you, Yulene? Did it take you a little bit to adjust to the writing style for this one?
The writing style in terms of the prose, I actually got used to pretty quickly, because I was also afraid of that, because English is not my first language. So I thought if he's going to use a lot of difficult words or the sentences are going to be very long, it will be difficult to get into. But I thought that it flowed quite nicely. So you read it at a natural pace almost immediately. I think that the only thing that I had difficulties with, and that's what Frank said, is that when he changes POV, he doesn't really make it very obvious from the get-go whose POV you are in. So then you have to go back and reread it. And that's why it took me longer to read it, because I just had to reread certain passages because of that. But not because the writing style or the words that he used were difficult, or because some of the sentences just didn't flow right. I didn't have that feeling at all. But I must say, for such a big book that it is, and with so many different characters, and I am a very character-driven reader, so often multiple POVs, that's something that's very jarring to me. I thought that the characters are so well developed that I just continued reading. And I think that that's one of the telltales that I know that I like a book, is when I don't start looking at the language, and I'm just reading. And then I have to go back and see what did he actually wrote, because I'm in the story and I'm not really nitpicking or trying to find faults almost. And when I start disliking a book, that's when I start doing that. So I actually really thought that the story flowed nicely. And I think that Philip also mentioned World War I at a certain point, and I thought that was interesting, because for me, this almost read like a history book. And but that can be, for me, also jarring, because I like reading from first-person POVs, where they're really in the person's head. That's not the case here. But you still felt like you were with the characters, because, like what Stacey said, you get to know more about them from the narrator's point of view as well. And that's why you keep being engaged, because your perspective of these people, it changes. In the beginning, Lauren is terrible human being, but then you understand that she has trauma and that she suffered. And it just changes everything that you think about certain people, like Tether Sale as well. You see that she made mistakes. I also asked the question actually on Mike's Discord if people thought that this was grim dark, because it's not like Mark Lawrence or something like that, but I felt like almost all of the characters here were morally gray, and there was no right and wrong, and this is a very dark world, so it almost felt grim dark slash very realistic to me in a very dark world. But I would like to see how this gets explored further.
It's a great point, Yulin, because as I was reading this, I thought this is a lot darker than I was expecting. That I would if it's in the grim dark category, but no one can review what grim dark means. But
yeah,
anyway,
it's like, not that horrible things are happening here or that you have very gruesome scenes. I haven't seen any, very torturesque scenes here yet, but just the characters in itself, they feel very morally gray. But then, at the other hand, that's also very realistic, especially in a military setting. You're not going to have somebody who's, completely without blame.
True.
Yeah,
So on the point.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, I thought the same thing when I was reading it because, but for a different reason. It just seemed like Erikson kept us in the dark parts of the world. And when I say that, I mean, even when you went to Darujistan from Pale, you only saw the dark parts of Darujistan. You saw the Assassins Guild, the thieves, you saw the corruption and the politics. You hung out a lot in a dark pub. You never really saw the happy-go-lucky people, even when at the end, when you're going through the festival, only time you see the people gathering and enjoying is when Animan or Rake is like, get off the road, you're gonna all blow up. So it wasn't even just that the characters were dark, but Erikson kept you in the very dark parts of the settings were always the darker, more grim parts of the world.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
Yeah. So the way I think of it as, and by the way, I like grimdark. So this is not a criticism at all of grimdark. Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire trilogy is one of my favorites. I love Joe Abercrombie. So there are plenty of great things to love about grimdark. But I don't actually think of Malazan as grimdark. And even though there's a lot of suffering in there, there's a lot of pain, and that is a reflection of the world we're in. There's a lot of suffering and loss and pain. But ultimately, it's a series that, and it may become more evident more after Guardians of the Moon, but it is a series that people say this all the time, but I think it's worth repeating. It's about compassion. And you will see this more and more. You will see this become, there are moments of connection where, for me, grimdark tends to emphasize our alienation and a sense of meaninglessness all around us, and then we're just sort of fighting to carve meaning out of this essentially bleak world. And there is bleakness in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Absolutely, there's some real suffering. I mean, you haven't seen anything really yet. There's really awful stuff that happens in the series. So it can be really hard at times, but there are these moments of incredible humor, incredible pathos, and connection. For me, the craziest thing that happens in these series is something that happens to us in real life when we connect with another person, when we have that sense of empathy that sort of leaps out in a moment when you feel, it could be when you're talking with somebody or when you do something, an act of kindness for someone. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. You have this incredible energy that happens between you, and it feels so uplifting. And it feels so cleansing. And the Malazan Book of the Fallen is all about that. It does that. It absolutely, I can't think of a single series that makes me cry more. And it's not in the moments of bleakness and sorrow and suffering where I cry. It's in those moments of incredible connection. It's in those moments when characters who you would think we're just at each other's throats, but suddenly see each other's humanity. And there's this incredible empathy that leaps out between them and between them and me, the reader. And I find that so transformative and so beautiful. And that's why this series is, for me, it's so sublime. And so I don't think of it as grimdark. Not that I think grimdark is a bad thing, but I think that it's ultimately more uplifting and affirmative than I typically think of grimdark as being.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe as far as because like Steve said, like nobody can agree on what exactly grimdark is.
That's
This
true.
is definitely, I mean, this is definitely dark fantasy. There's, that's for sure. But it might be that like I don't. It is weird how to describe it. I mean, maybe it's a like the temperature of or how you had the feeling going through the entire book never really changes. You no matter what, even if they're joking, you still maybe it's because that those type of things don't go on long enough that it all feels very I don't know. You're very cold through the whole thing. You know, even and maybe a little bit changes in the later books when you get some more uplifting things, but you never feel like you're uplifted in the book. You're always kind of cold through the whole thing. But I don't know. It definitely doesn't go all the way to grimdark. As some other people, other authors take it.
Hmm.
So what Philip said kind of reminds me of my feelings of reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. And I think the reason why those moments are so powerful is because of what the characters go through. They had to go through some really awful things, so
Yeah.
you feel when they achieve their goal or there's a moment between characters, it's that much more powerful. And that's what I felt in Gardens of the Moon. When you had those moments, of compassion, for example, what I said about Perrin and how he didn't leave Lauren in the street.
Yeah.
And another example of Perrin is when he finds Cole in the
Yeah.
plains, and he helps him get back. Now he had his reasons for wanting Cole to take him into the city, but it also came from a place of compassion. He didn't want to leave him, and he could have insisted they go right away, but he said, I think you need another day to rest. Those moments are very important. The whole relationship between the bridge burners and then so I agree, but it makes it more powerful because of the darkness that surrounds them, that when they do that, it's brighter light. But I also enjoy the levity. As you were saying, there's a lot of humor in here. I think that the levity in the story really is so much fun because it makes the characters seem a little bit more human. One of the there's two moments that come to mind when I think of it. One of the moments was when Fiddler and I can't remember the other saboteur. That when they're playing cards with the kind of like tarot deck, and they're they're playing cards with that. That was so funny. And then also when Creppa, he has this whole like mask, this personality that he puts on when he's around people, and that there's a moment where something happens and he's so shocked by it, he drops that mask for a minute, and the people around him go, "Man, he must be really drunk," when he's actually talking more coherently. I thought that was so funny.
Or how about Animander Rake showing up to the fete with a dragon mask on?
Oh,
Oh yeah.
And Krupp having a cherub mask. I mean,
Yes.
could it be more obvious what they're doing there?
It's so funny.
As far as like the compassion for for all the different people, I also we're seeing a lot of these moments where people were feeling that way towards the animals that we're seeing here. Like in the beginning where in Itko Khan, right, with the horses, I was really stuck on that because I think there was one scene where he says what was it, like he looked at the people that were laid out dead, and this madness, this kind of mad smile that this one corpse had, and then he looked at the horse and it had like this fear. And I was really stuck on that because it was like this innocence that these animals are kind of going through, or even like the hounds, how they were kind of enslaved and he like freed it at the end. Who was it, Crocus, or was it I get so confused now. But this compassion towards these animals that probably don't have anything to do with what's going on, or even like the ravens, like they're just trying to eat, right? But we have this negative perception of them because they're eating dead people, right? But or who was it, Hairlock, like shooting these ravens out of the sky, right? And you just have these feelings towards these animals, especially like I think for me, like the horses, like they're not in this war. They're just kind of put there, and I just kept feeling so bad for them, just seeing how helpless they are in these situations and how the people, like these main characters, are like looking at them. I was just really stuck on that a lot.
Reading Rainbow, which is the best. I love that username. The Demon Pearl, a standout moment in Gardens of the Moon for compassion.
Remind me again, because I feel stupid. I don't remember this person.
You pity me.
So yeah, he's the one that is on the roofs of Darujistan during the assassin fights and all of that. Is summoned. And he dies in defense of, is it Column? I think at that moment, who Quick Ben has given him this thing to throw, and then that brings out the demon, and then Pearl defends him, and he knows he's going to die. Do I have that right, everyone? Because it's been a year or more since I read this.
Yeah.
So that's what I think, and I agree, because and just like Ersi was saying, there's an environmental aspect to this series as well, and sort of the compassion doesn't stop at humanity. It really is. There's a lot of about animals and all our fellow creatures, and that sense of connection I was talking about isn't just between people. It's between all of life. It's all of life, that our connection to the cosmos, and so absolutely. And the fact that Pearl is a demon doesn't make me feel any less sorry for Pearl in that moment. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say on my read through, that was a moment that I was waiting for again, like that, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on. So again, that's the reason why I reread it, so I could brush up. But that was a moment that stuck with me, because the reason that he did that, at least in my mind, was to let you know how strong the other side is, because he tells you, like, oh, Pearl could level a city if they wanted to. And so he uses that to show you how strong the other side is by showing that they can kill Pearl. But then he went deeper into the emotions of Pearl, and kind of, instead of just being like, oh, this is a really strong character, that, the other side's stronger than you think, and then running away, he let you stay there for a moment and give the character some depth.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
That brings up a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, Layla.
Well, that brings up a question I had about Pearl, and not just Pearl, but the demon world, I guess. In regard to, that would be a spiritual death, not just a physical death. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? So the power that Pearl was facing, it was not just a physical power, but something on the magical spiritual plane. Is that, when I say that? I
agree.
I think so.
I don't remember specifically. You probably are right. There are lots of ways. This series talks a lot about dying and death, and sometimes, there are characters who you've already kind of seen here that can have more than one soul inhabiting one body. Like Sari, for example. Sari contains the young woman's original soul, but also has Rigalai. We learned has been in there protecting her from the trauma of what she's been doing as a slave of Cotillion, essentially, as his vessel. And Cotillion is in there as well. So there are three souls in one body here, and there are different ways that characters can die, and then there's death. So and sometimes you think a character might be gone, but then there are ways in which they can come back. So that's something to look out for, I guess. But then there's really, really gone, and then maybe that's what happens to Pearl in that moment, and there's no possibility of coming back from that. I don't remember specifically, but it sounds like you're right to me.
Okay. And someone in the chat mentioned spiritual enslavement.
Oh, of course. Okay. So Frank mentions Dragnapur, which is a whole. Was Pearl killed by? Oh, huh. Now I'm wondering how much of this I remember. Okay.
I don't even remember. I just read it.
so
if that's
much.
the case, then going into Dragnapur is a totally different level of what happens to you after you die. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So
Cool.
Yeah, one
You
thing
guys
I
were
don't
talking
know.
about.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and Ursi brought up the creatures of this world, and we're talking about the demons and their gods. There's so many cool things that are in this world. I'm really excited to continue to read. You've got dragons, you've got giant ravens, you've got those like insect like flying things. I can't remember the name of the people that ride them.
The
You've got
Moran.
there's just so many things, and then that's not even the spiritual aspects of it with the gods and the things that live in the warrens, and it's just so cool.
yeah, so we have confirmation in the chat, and of course that's right because this comes up later. Pearl was killed by Dragnapur, which is a fate worse than death.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you'll find out more about that a lot later in the series. But remember Pearl.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and one thing, I mean, I don't know, maybe it was just me and maybe it was explained in there, but and I've lost it in all the other trying to retain all the other information. But when they explain, like, there's a bunch of different gods, and like sometimes they explain that the gods are worshipped, and maybe that's how they get their power. But then also they were talking about moon spawn, and people look up at the moon. So at one point I was thinking to myself, is this a separate planet that just moves around? Is that where he's from? So is he basically an alien and he's
his people are just more powerful, or is he an actual god in the city that just kind of floats and goes wherever he wants to go? So a little bit, I was kind of confused on like certain aspects on that. I'm like, am I the only one that was kind of confused about that?
Yeah. So to answer that about Moonspawn, it's more mountain-sized than planet-sized, I think is one way to put it. It's big. It's like a city-sized, huge mountainous rock that floats. And there is a kind of, I can't say much about it yet, but you'll get more insight into how what that is exactly later in the series. But in terms of the gods, you do have the elder gods like Krull. You met Krull, sort of, here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have younger gods like Shadow Throne or Aminos and Cotillion. And so these are more recently, they were at one time humans who, it's called ascension. So when they ascend, they become gods. And that can happen many different ways. But worship is one of the components there. But it usually has to do with just leveling up in terms of power and finding different paths to power until you get to this place where you have enough power to ascend. But to become a true god, there has to be an element of worship as well. So it's complicated. In other words, lots of ways that it can happen. But yeah, so elder gods and then the ascendants are later gods.
So I know a lot of us had, there's portions that we didn't quite understand. So I thought it might be good to set aside a little bit of time for any of you to ask if you were confused by something specifically, now that we have people who can help us through it. So does anyone have anything that they were struggling with or curious about?
I did. What I found interesting was, and I think we've alluded to some of this, of how complex the scenarios can be, but Colum and Quickbin helped Hairlock achieve his new status, but then kind of let him go, and he was stored with Tattersail, who he ended up killing, if I remember correctly. Maybe I misunderstood that, but I guess I was trying to understand their original motivation for helping Hairlock, and then what I understood was sort of turning him loose to wreak havoc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some inner politics going on, and the bridge burners, which were a revered unit or a group of soldiers within the Malazan Empire, has fallen out of favor with Lysine. This has a lot to do with Lysine taking over and trying to remove any elements that might be a threat to her, any old guard elements that would be more loyal to the previous emperor and his right-hand man. Kellenved and Dancer. And so that's part of this, is that she's trying to remove the bridge burners because they're a possible threat. And so Quickben and others are trying to keep ahead of her. And the whole making of him into a puppet, of course, is part of those inner politics, I guess. That's part of it. Hairlock, but he gets his own ideas because he's ambitious and he wants power himself. So he ends up doing his own thing, and so Quickben has trying to use him, and he's trying to use Quickben. There's a lot of using each other going on here. But the context is that there are elements within the Malazan Empire that Lysine is trying to purge because they're a perceived threat to her power, including the bridge burners, which is why some people think they were wiped out at Pale, that they were not entirely wiped out, but a lot of them were buried underneath all of that rubble after Taishren unleashes all that power. So yeah, exactly, because Taishren is perceived as an agent of Lysine, as being loyal to Lysine. And so yes, Hairlock going through chaos is a way of avoiding being detected by Taishren. And so they're basically trying to figure out what's going on and trying to use Hairlock to help them. But he gets his own ideas because he's ambitious. So I don't know if that does that help you, Layla?
It does, because toward the end of Hairlock, I was trying to figure out, was this the intended plan? I mean, to let him do what he did and then ultimately gets destroyed or self-destructed. So that helps a lot. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. And by the way, Tattersail is actually not killed by Hairlock. Tattersail is killed in a confrontation with Bellardan, Skullcrusher, the other big, mage.
Right.
He's a high mage. Yeah. And so that it produces a huge explosion of magic that results in, well, you'll see what it results in eventually, but you get a hint of where that's going. What happens to Tattersail in that moment. So I don't want to say too much about that. But yeah,
no, that's helpful. I'll reread that. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be important a little bit later as well. That scene where Tattersail and Bellardan are encountering each other, and of course he has the remains of Nightchill with him as well. Nightchill was the other high mage who was killed at Pale by Taishren. She was ripped apart by Taishren's demons there. And she and Bellardan were lovers. And he's kind of in mourning for her at this moment. So that's sort of important, but you'll see.
So you brought that up, and that's one of the things I had forgotten that I was confused about. When that whole thing happens, you get the impression that Tattersail has a plan. I mean, she wasn't just going to kill herself. She had a plan. Did she put her soul inside the remains of, I can't remember the other mage you were just talking about, Nightchill.
Nightchill.
Is that how she escaped? Because
so
they found two bodies, and so they were convinced she was dead. But she didn't die because she ended up, with Krepa and the Ravi. Yeah.
Yes, the Reedy woman. Yes. So I mentioned before about how you can have more than one soul in one body. And this is going to be one of those things. Okay. So what happened there wasn't so much, it wasn't deliberate. You're on the right track, but it wasn't a plan. Let's put it that way. But what happens in Krupp's dream warren is made possible by several elements. One is Krupp himself. The other is the Amas, the bone caster. And then there is the Reedy woman who becomes the vessel for this a baby that is born out of this tragic scenario after Tattersail and Bellardan encounter each other with Nightchill's corpse in the mix. You'll find out what results from all that later in the series.
Mhm.
Oh, so interesting. Where does he get this stuff? His ideas?
Yeah, I mean, he goes for it here. He really goes for it. So yeah.
And Kirsty, do you have anything that you're confused about?
Yeah, I was very confused about the assassin. I guess is that. So I was just very confused about the Assassin's War in the city of Darujistan, right? I was just very confused about like what was going on and like the politics and the council and the majority and you know all of that was just I felt like it just kind of flew over my head a lot, and I was really trying to like comprehend all of that, all like everything that was going on, but I felt like it was just too much. Like I just didn't get it. What the politics were in the city and what they were trying to achieve with like the assassins and the guild, and then Vulcan comes in and Baruch and all these people. Like I didn't know what the end goal was for each of these groups, and I think that's what kind of made me really confused when we were in the city.
Yeah, does anyone else want to take a stab at this, or should I go ahead?
Steve's like, no.
All right. So Darujistan, the last independent city in Genebakis, where the Malazans have been taking over, has several factions within it that are sort of in charge. You have the council with counselors, like Cole used to be one, but you have what's his name, who gets killed by Ralik Nam at the end.
Or
yes, thank you, Turban Orr. Yes, so he's a counselor as well, and these are aristocrats who think they're in charge. And there are the assassins.
Can you say that?
Yeah, there are these assassins there that are used by the aristocrats, and there are certain there's etiquette that they follow in the employment of these assassins, and the assassins themselves have a sort of occasionally turf wars and things like that. But you have the main assassins guild that is ruled by Vorkin, and she is an extremely powerful individual. And so you've got the council, you've got the assassins who are used by the council and to sort of get rid of enemies in a certain, you have to follow the rules when you're using an assassin, but they're an element of control. But the real power in Darujistan is actually the mages, like Baruch. They're more behind the scenes. They're not really known to the common citizen at all. They're sort of doing their thing behind the scenes, and they allow the council to think that they're in charge. But you have this circle of mages, of very powerful mages who are really kind of pulling strings behind the scenes a bit there. And Krupp is not actually one of them, but he's also doing something similar.
Yeah, I think they tried to tell you what was going on. I don't know. I don't know if that was wholly on purpose because he thought maybe you would be confused, but he was just like, you can't topple the government this way because everyone greases the gears here in a certain way. So if you have to take over, you have to leave most of this intact, or the whole thing falls apart. And I guess I'm sure Erickson has kind of gotten that from seeing other countries fall and people just try to go in. And if you don't leave certain people in charge, or you don't keep certain people around that you don't think should be around, well, they're there for a reason, and it would just all tumble to the ground.
Ursi, in addition to this, I don't know if this is part of your question, but in addition to that, there are, the bridge burners are sent there to hire the assassins to take out the mages, because the mages are the ones who are truly in charge. And then you have Animander Rake, who's working with the mages, and Shadow Throne also trying to stop. That's why they're assassinating assassins, so the assassins can't be hired.
Cool.
It was all confusing to me too, but yeah, I made a lot of notes and I didn't bring any of them with me. But I every time a new character was added, I would go to the front, where it lists the characters, and I would write what page they came in on so I could go back.
It's just all these strings. I just think of that meme from Always Sunny with Charlie, all with all the strings.
Dedicate a wall to the series and just keep track of it that way.
And of course,
and then not to mention what Lauren is doing with the Tyrant.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And you have Shadow Throne trying to oppose Lassine's plans in Darujhistan as well, which is, it's just all these elements, and it can be it is deliberately chaotic. And when it's a typical Malazan thing at the end, just have them all converge. It's a Malazan convergence at the end, and that's what you get. It's just what is going on here? And everything's exploding, and there are all these different elements coming together all at once, and that happens in the series a lot. It's usually a lot of fun.
Swing keeps spinning.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and the Crimson Guard are there.
Yes. Who is the Crimson Guard? They're talked about twice in the whole book.
Yeah. So they're the
Everybody
Crimson
keeps
Guard.
bringing them up.
They're a group of technically mercenaries that are originally from Quon Tali, which is the same continent that the Malazan Empire is based in. And they are against the Malazan Empire. They've sworn a vow to defeat the Malazan Empire. So they are bitter enemies of the Malazan Empire. And they have been fighting the Malazan Empire in Genabakis, along with Anomander Rake and Caladan Brood. They're in this sort of loose alliance that has been opposing the expansion of the Malazan Empire in Genabakis. So that's who they are, the Crimson Guard. Yeah.
Wow.
And then the Claw.
They come up a lot
Anybody
more
understand who the Claw was?
Sorry?
The Claw? Who are they?
Oh, so the Claw are the Imperial assassins, and they are loyal to Lassine. They do her bidding, and she was the head of the Claw before she became the Empress, and so they are one of the primary means by which she achieved power. So the Claw, yeah, and they have assassins, and they have also mage assassins as well. So they're pretty scary.
That's what Lorne is, right? She's got the special sword. That's
so Lorne,
right?
Yeah, she's different. So the Otateral sword, Otateral is a substance that defeats magic. You can't use, especially not the Elder Warrens so much, but the normal Warrens. You can't use magic around Otateral. So it defeats magic. Having that sword makes Lorne largely immune to magic. So that's what that is. And so she's not a Claw. But she is an agent of Lassine at the same time, though, a different agent, I guess. The Claw has a head whose name is Topper, and you do meet him in the book as well early on with, I think he meets with Ganos Perrin earlier in the book. So, yeah.
I'm going to have to rewatch and re-listen to this and take notes.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
And Yulene, was there anything that you were kind of wanted to clear up?
Yeah, well, I was wondering a little bit about the traveling through the Warrens, because we have Hairlock, and when he gets into his puppet body, he's already pretty unhinged. But I felt like when he was traveling through the Chaos Warren that he got more and more unreliable, and up to towards the end where he kills those ravens for no clear reason, or at least not one that I could really tell. And I was wondering, is it because he travels so much through that Warren of Chaos, because that's one that all the others can't really access? Or is it something that happens to all the Warrens? If you use too much magic, does this do something to your mental state? Or is it just because he's in that puppet body?
I always thought of them as magical wormholes. Yeah.
That's not wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Hairlock was not a nice person to begin with. He was kind of a malicious individual. But I think you're absolutely right, Yolene, about the influence of him being in chaos and that just increasing his tendency toward cruelty and random cruelty. So he just, I think that when The Warrens are kind of complicated. So they are both conduits. Mages are essentially themselves conduits to the power that comes from these various Warrens, and they are also they're sources of power, but they're also places you can travel in and through. And so chaos is sort of outside all the other Warrens. It's dangerous. You don't want to mess with chaos because of the influence it can have. And if a mage allows too much power to course through them, it has really negative consequences on their sanity. And that happens a few times in the series. So I think you're right about Hairlock becoming more and more unhinged as it goes along.
He was my favorite character. I loved him.
Yeah.
I was wanting to know like what everybody thought about the magic and the Warrens in general. How are you thinking of them in your head? And she was saying like a wormhole, and that's kind of how I pictured them, like looking like the Milky Way opening up in front of your chest or something like that whenever they were doing it. But they like you could sometimes you could travel through them, and you know.
That's kind of what I had in mind too. Yeah, like a portal.
I think my main impression right now is that they're a repository of power, possibly fueled by a particular god, but I'm not quite there. Okay.
Yep.
That's
right.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because I know they do that, like the Marvel does that a lot, where you have certain things that you can use and they're powered by some god in a different realm. You know, so that's kind of what I was thinking as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you get more and more sense of what they are as you get through the series, but you never are quite sure. The Warrens and also the deck of dragons, which you mentioned, some people mentioned earlier, the tarot deck. You never really know how that works exactly, and there is an element of chaos to it, and unpredictability. And it works differently in different hands. Different people use the deck of dragons differently from others. Yeah, Paulson. Yeah, there's a lot you get used to, but that's part of the fun too. I mean, it's a series that allows you to gradually come to understand these things more and more. And I had the problem when I first read the series of wanting to know it all at once. And I didn't allow myself to just enjoy getting to know all these quirks and aspects of this world and the way the magic works. And so I would just advise anyone, don't do what I did and don't try to master it all at once. Just allow yourself to become more and more steeped in it. And it builds and it grows.
Like when it comes to the magic, this is the kind of magic style that I actually do enjoy. I have a hard time with I might be in the minority in this, but like with Sanderson, like I've only read like the Mistborn like once, and there's all these rules, and I felt like I needed to like take notes and like to figure out like what all these things are. And like over here, it's really different because some people have magic, some people don't, some people can access things. You know, some people you can give them something and it helps them defeat the magic, like with the sword. So I just like, this is the kind of stuff where it's a little vague. I think just because I kind of like magical realism too, like where this unexplained kind of magic that's coming in play. And I really like the mysterious and the vagueness of it all. But there are some sort of rules too, like you're tainted by the Warrens, like the different Warrens that you access and stuff can influence how the outcome of whatever you're trying to do, right? Or even like with Krupa, he's just like, and I'm gonna cast a spell on you to make you forget. Like where does his magic come from, But it's really vague, and I kind of like that. It's just like, just go with the flow, these kind of this magic style in this one. That's one of the things that I like about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ursi on that, because when you don't set all these rules to your magic system, it could really go anywhere. And we see that at the end of Gardens of the Moon with this like acorn that turns, the what is it called? The finnet?
Yes, finest.
Anyway, the finest. And it turns into like this tree monster thingy, which then is embodied by the spirit of the tyrant. And it's just like, where does Erickson come up with this stuff? But you can do those things and surprise the reader with all these new things because the magic system isn't so hard. It isn't scientific. The reader doesn't know everything and all the possibilities of it. And I thought that was great. Like that whole scene I had to read over again because I was like, okay, the tyrant died here, but then its spirit went into here. And it's like, what? Okay. And then they blew it up, but it didn't die. It was just...
Yeah, you're talking about the Azath. So that's another element of the Malazan world that is can confuse people at first, but they're entities that are pretty inexplicable, but they seem to be interested in balance of power, and they will absorb very powerful entities, threatening entities like Raced, and keep them prisoner. So that is one of the things they do, and you can also travel through them. But if you go inside one, it can be very difficult to get out.
And the one that absorbed the tyrant, that became the house that in the epilogue, who was it? Was it Crocus that went into the house, or who was it that went into the house?
It was Ralik Nam, perhaps you're thinking of at the end.
Okay, yes.
With Vorkin, yeah.
Yes.
Because another function is if you go into an Azath and you're terribly wounded, it's like time doesn't apply inside the Azath, so you won't die. You'll probably just eventually just kind of heal inside there. So it's a way of saving her life in that moment. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul says a warren is a path to a different realm. Each realm has a specific aspect of magic. You can tap into a warren to sip at it, or jump right into it, use it to travel. That's my mental definition anyway.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so like Telon is fire, right? There's a fire element to Telon. Omtos Falak has ice, right? It's a cold warren. Rashan is darkness. And there are older ones that are shadow warrens. Yeah, well,
is this in the back of the book?
It's it. I think there may be. I don't know if it's in Gardens of the Moon, but I think there may be books where it does list the warrens. And a good resource if you don't look at things that can be spoilery is the Malazan wiki, which will define all these things as well.
Yeah, I'm just afraid. I'm afraid that it's going to spoil me, which is why I haven't gone in there.
You do have to be careful in there. Yeah.
I want to look at the character. What?
Oh, I was just saying it was a good resource, especially like putting faces to some of these people, just like the artwork. It helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, I went to look up somebody because I was like, who was this person again? And they weren't listed in the front of the books. And it spoiled me for something they do later. And I was like, oh, oops. So I don't look at it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But like most of the time when people do magic, they talk about I'm opening up the warren, or my warren's going to do this or that. But when Krumpa does stuff, he just seems he just like put a spell on the guy or goes to sleep. So I don't know if Krumpa is definitely special, but I don't know if there's something outside of the warrens that he has, or if he is something that just projects the power or something. But I don't remember him ever talking about opening up a warren.
I don't think he does either.
Yeah,
you're right, Joseph. You should be scared of Krupp because of that. And there are
is his own warren.
Yeah, well, there are other types of magic as well. You'll meet a character later on named Bottle who uses an entirely different type of magic. It's more empathy based, or more. There's earth magic as well. There are older types of magic. But the main type of magic you're going to encounter in the series is the warrens. His finger waving does it. Yeah.
So did you guys catch at the end after Animander Rake kills the tyrant? Not the tyrant. What was that other being?
One of the demons.
Was it a demon?
The Jagger?
No, it wasn't the Jagger. No.
Yeah, because he doesn't fight the Jagged Tyrant, who
No,
is
no, he
waste.
fights. I can't remember
fights
who.
a-
Why can I not remember?
Well, it's a big
It's like we
demon with a
just
big
read
old
this.
axe, right?
Yeah, but it had a anyway. When he kills him,
Galen Demon
somebody
War.
else
Yeah.
says a Warren just died. Was that because of what he did?
Huh, I have to look
You
at that
guys
moment.
catch that?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
In the moment when if I have you correct, Stacy, it's the moment when he kills the Ghislaine demon. And
Yeah,
Frank
that's
and
what I thought too.
have both
Galang
mentioned that in
Lord.
the chat. I don't remember how that affects Warren's, but you should know that I think it's evident enough that sword he's wielding, Dragnapur, when he kills something, that soul of that being enters into that sword. That's what happens there, which is why poor Pearl was so distraught when he knew he was going to have to fight Anomander Rake. He's like, oh boy, this is bad. So is that maybe what you're talking about there? The idea of him entering that particular warren of the sword, or I'm not sure. But
No, I mean, it didn't say it was closed. It said it was dead. A Warren just died, or Warren was just destroyed, something like that. I'm trying to find it.
because there are warrens. I don't want to be spoilery about this, but there are warrens in the series too that are shattered and broken, and these things can happen as well, and they can die. So that is a thing in the series. What you're talking about, I just don't remember the specifics.
They even kind of say that there are warrens that don't exist anymore, or that they thought didn't exist anymore. I mean, they kind of say that in the first book.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to thank all of you for reading, because I feel a lot better about the book now after talking with all. So I wanted to ask, who's continuing on the series? Because I'm going to the end, but who's coming with me? I guess. Okay, cool.
Yay!
Look, it's unanimous, and I think we're planning on about 6 weeks from now. Is that about right? We'll come up with a date and let everyone know. But it's on our forums. If anyone's curious, wants to join in on it, anyone's welcome to join in and chat. So, thanks again to all of you for coming by. The time just flew by, and I lost track of time.
Yeah.
But,
It was fun.
So,
it was great to have you here.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys for putting up with me here. I really enjoyed hearing your reactions. I thought you all said some really cool things about the characters, and it's so much fun to. Now I understand, because when I was starting my reread, how enthusiastic the Malazan fans can be, and how encouraging they always have been for me, including some of the people who are in the chat right now, by the way. It's a really wonderful community to be part of. So I'd like to thank the people in the chat as well. But thank you all for, putting up with me and and it's a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what you guys think of Dead House Gates.
So of course you're invited to come for the next meetup for Dead House Gates. If you're able to, we'd love to have you so we can pick your brain and you can help us along and answer some questions for us.
I want to say one thing before we. There is a brand new channel. Well, they're a very small channel called Seven's Book Discussion, and it's a husband and wife, and he's read all of the books. I think he just finished the last one, so he talks her into reading it. And they do one episode for each of the sections of the Gardens of the Moon. It is so much fun to watch her, struggle through it and him try to explain things. So I think anybody here, now that you guys have read it, you should go check those videos out. They're a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Recommendation.
Sounds good.
What was it called again, Stacy?
Seven's, SEVIN, Seven's Book Discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I do have everyone's channels that were to hear today down below, so be sure and check them out if you haven't already. And of course, Joseph has a book, More Than a Vampire. Go check that out as well. All the links are down below. So thanks again, everyone in the chat, and everyone for coming by to come on by on stream. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to meet with so many great people. So thank you for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.